Today we are going to run 3 sessions. Session 1 will discuss about inequality outlook in the G20 economies and the impact of technology on inequality with the focus on the future of work. In Session 2, we will start to discuss about policies for bridging divides. And in the last session, we will discuss about transforming technology into equality tools through international cooperation. You are all invited to participate actively in all sessions by raising questions through slido.com and using hashtag VTI Seminar G20. I would also like to inform you that after the seminar, there will be a gala dinner held in Buddhist Sanctuary of Borobudur area, and we look forward to your participation. Without further ado, to mark the commencement of this seminar, we are very honored to have an opening remarks delivered by G20 Indonesia Finance Deputy. I am now very pleased to invite Mr. Rionald Silaban to deliver his welcome remark.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and His Majesty Sri Paku Alam, the Vice Governor of Region of Yogyakarta, and also my former boss, Mr. Khatib Basri. Thank you very much for being here. It is a great pleasure to be with all of you in here for today's inequality and the role of technology in shaping the futures of work seminar. As the Indonesian MOF G20 Deputy, I welcome you to this beautiful city of Yogyakarta. The city with heritage, where you still can see the Sultanate of Jogja and its palace. So let me tell you, Jogja is also the part of the making of Republic of Indonesia. And even Jogja was once the capital of Indonesia in 1946, when Jakarta was under attack. And also as to the current development of this city, Jogja has initiative to tackle inequality through the use of technology with the development of Kampung Cyber, we call it in our language. In English is Cyber Village. So this has caught attention for technology literacy of its residents. They embrace the technology advances by using the internet as a means to do business. So those are the reasons why we do like to bring you to Jogja. And after welcoming you to the city, I also would like to welcome you to this seminar, which gather members of the G20 Framework Working Group, government agencies, multilateral development, and also the international organization. As we know in today's seminar, fundamental issues regarding the nature and impact of technology development on economic and business will be discussed, as well as its link to inequality. In addition, possibility to transform technology as an enabler of equality through cross-cutting policies and international cooperation will also be discussed, along with the possible role of technology in bridging various divides. With that, we do thank the Argentina presidency for bringing this issue as priority in the G20. Ladies and gentlemen, when we met at Bariloche at the first G20 Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting under Argentina presidency, we do share that discussions of the future's work is essential for developing a common and clearer understanding of impact of technological change and its potential to boost productivity, growth, job creation, and inclusiveness. This seminar is part of the response to this request for further work on future of work agenda. This seminar will deepen the understanding on inequality issues related to the role of technological progress through finding what needs to be done and learning within the G20 members for policy formulation. I do believe that through this seminar, we could learn and share a common and clear understanding of how technological advances can help economies unlock their potential by gaining greater benefit of this technology innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, with this in mind, I encourage your active participation and sharing of ideas so we can deliver a meaningful update to the Framework Working Group meeting tomorrow. My next speaker will be His Majesty Sri Paku Alam. He would also like to welcome you and tell you a bit about Yogyakarta. So, to me, to close the welcoming remark, I also would like you to experience the Jogja, to share what we have with Jogja and its heritage, and then to get some batik, because for the upcoming World Bank and IMF annual meeting, we are going to announce that batik will be the dress code. With that, I would like to thank you all for being here. Thank you.
For your speech. On this opportunity, we also have the honor to invite His Majesty Sri Paduka Paku Alam X, Vice Governor of Yogyakarta Special Region, to deliver his opening speech. His Majesty, please come to the podium.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to deliver the governor's speech. Governor of Yogyakarta Special Region, welcome remarks, international seminar, Inequality and the Role of Technology in Shaping the Future of Work, Yogyakarta, January 23rd, 2018. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, my peace be upon us all. Excellencies, participants, international seminar, Inequality and the Role of Technology in Shaping the Future Works, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, on behalf of the government and people of Yogyakarta, I am delighted to welcome all of you to Yogyakarta, an attractive cultural city. I do welcome your attendance at this progressive international seminar, Inequality and the Role of Technology in Shaping the Future of Work, and look forward to your active participation. I hope the friendliness and hospitality in our city, Yogyakarta, will make your activities extraordinary experiences, and I do hope that you all enjoy your stay here, and on this morning, good opportunity. As one benefit of this strategic event, let me share you all some notes about our city, Yogyakarta. Ladies and gentlemen, Yogyakarta, or lovingly known as Jogja Istimewa, is a city with a number of special attributes. It is known as a heroic city, a city of education, and the major center of Javanese culture and tradition. Its appeal includes the endless attraction and finest atmosphere, the natural wonders, Javanese heritage, local culture, arts and tradition, and also delicious culinary delights it offers make Jogja one of the most visited tourist destinations in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, Yogyakarta has a great deal of potential in tourism. Every rural tourist spot in Yogyakarta has its own culture and tradition, and it is blessed with a natural beauty that is unique. Therefore, despite your pressed schedule, busy activities during this program, I invite you to explore Yogyakarta a bit more truly to uncover its richness in fascinating art, entertaining attraction, colorful culture, friendly people, and endless culinary choices. I do hope you will enjoy your stay here or even lengthen your stay here, so that you could spend more time to satisfy your hunger for cultural curiosity. I wish you all a fabulous day and thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, His Majesty, for your speech. We would like to welcome His Excellency Bambang Brojonegoro, Minister of National Development Planning of Republic of Indonesia, and also Professor Suhasil Nazara, Head of Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the seminar, we are very much honored to have keynote speech delivered by Minister of National Development Planning of the Republic of Indonesia. I am very pleased to invite His Excellency Bambang Brojonegoro to deliver his keynote speech.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all of you. Representative from the government of Yogyakarta, high-ranking official from Finance Ministry, Pak Hatib Basri, all distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation from the Ministry of Finance for this opportunity, and I believe the topic of today's seminar about the relationship between inequality and role of technology is very much relevant to the current situation. If you look at what happened today, of course, we can conclude that we live in a better world and we live in more comfortable situation, at least compared to our previous generation, and certainly our younger generation enjoy what happened today. And it is about the rise of the digital technology. So instead of reading newspaper, now you're looking your cell phone or iPad to get the most recent news, sometimes real-time news, and then when you need a taxi, you don't need to wait on the side of the street waving to the passing taxis. Instead, you just go to your cell phone again using the apps and you get the taxi right away at the good price. And certainly communication among us now using less direct conversation through the telephone. Instead, we use any chatting apps, WhatsApp, Facebook, and of course, still the emails. Very much important for us. And then, when you need to get something for your daily needs, you don't need to go that far to the nearest supermarket or nearest convenience store. Instead, you can just find out what will be available through the e-commerce. And of course, for investment, especially in the stock market, you don't need to go physically to the stock exchange, and you can just sit down at your house and then doing the transaction. And of course, now the role of social media sometimes is as important as the formal media. So clearly, we live in a different world. Sometimes it is much more convenient, but the challenge now is not for our personal life. The challenge now is for the development economics itself. How can we deal with this digital technology when at the same time you need to deal with the development issue? And development issue, it could be poverty issue, especially for countries like Indonesia, as well as, I think, the issues, development issues that relevant not only for developing countries or emerging economies like Indonesia, but I believe also applies for most advanced countries in the world, which is inequality. And we know inequality now is a global phenomenon. Even countries like US, countries like in the Western Europe's trying to deal on how to reduce the impact, the negative impact of inequality. So let's try to digest what could happen if the digitalization of the economy keeps growing while we have to still reduce the poverty, reducing inequality, as well as reducing one of the most important element of the development issues, reducing unemployment. And let's take a look at Indonesia's digital economy condition today. In terms of internet penetration rate, of course, there has been, I think, quite significant growth. From 2013, only 38 million Indonesian population has internet connection or has something to do with the internet. In 2015, only 2 years, jumps to 88 million. So 50 million only in 2 years period. 50 million growth only in 2 years period. And then our forecast by 2020 it will be 145 million. So another jump, almost 60 million in only 5 years period. So clearly, internet becomes a daily household activities in Indonesia, in every individual household. And then, quite interestingly, the Indonesian spend 3.5 hours on the internet every day, double than the American. Of course, the question, this is a good sign or bad sign? I mean, a good sign if we can use the internet productively for doing the work, doing the economic transaction, or doing other stuff that is productive. But of course, it could be less productive if we just spend the internet just to do browsing, doing chatting, or doing some social media that doesn't help in terms of increasing productivity. So this is our current situation, and because we have different islands, of course, in Java, the penetration rate is quite high, is 65%. And then in Kalimantan, which is the producer of the natural resources, 5.8%, while in Papua is still 2.5%. Of course, in Papua, we still have the issue of the internet connection. By 2019, we hope that our national fiber optic system will be completed in Papua, and it will connect every district in Papua. So hopefully there will be more internet penetration in Papua after 2019. So again, dealing with the development issues, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have done some good progress in reducing poverty as well as reducing inequality. At least on the latest data is released based on September 2017, the poverty rate has been declining from 10.96% to 10.12%. And this is the lowest poverty rate ever in Indonesia history. And we are really targeting, of course, we need to do some extra work to make sure that this year our poverty rate will be below 10%. So it is very hard job, but at the same time, we have to deal also with this penetration of the digital economy. In terms of the absolute number of people under poverty line, it has been declining from 27 million, so it's still quite a big number actually. Although we have 10.12%, it is still 26.5 million people. And I believe this 26.5 million poor Indonesian is bigger than many total population of other countries in the world. So our job is really still very challenging. In terms of inequality, although it's quite challenging given the fact that even advanced countries all around the world experience some higher inequality indicated by the higher Gini ratio, but at least in Indonesia, since 2015, we have been able to bring down our Gini ratio to below 0.4. Just for your information, our Gini ratio suddenly jumped to 0.441 in 2011. In 2010, it's still below 0.4. I think it's around still 0.39. But then jumped directly 0.41 in 2011 due to the commodity price booming. And it stays there. It stayed there for almost 3 years, above 0.4. And then starting in 2015, this current government trying to bring it down. And currently, we have the position of Gini ratio at 0.391. Of course, still quite close to 0.4, but the most important thing, the trend is declining rather than increasing. But of course, this inequality declining is not yet reflecting our fundamental improvement in inequality, because the lower Gini ratio is more due to the decreasing gap between the middle class and the higher class, the higher income class and the middle income class. But the lower or the lowest income class still behind in terms of their spending activity compared to the middle and to the upper level. And since this topic of the seminar is about inequality, let's look how this digital technology advancement will affect the inequality. In our analysis, there are 4 reasons why inequality occurs. Not only in Indonesia, I believe, but also in other parts of the world. The first factor would be inequality of opportunity. And of course, this happens in also many other countries in the world. Secondly, and this is quite relevant for Indonesia, a high degree of wealth concentration by only very few people or companies. Third reason, low resilience to shocks and vulnerability to fall into poverty. In Indonesia case, usually related to the natural disasters. We have, we are in the situation in which natural disaster occurs quite frequently. It could be in terms of eruption, volcanic eruption. So at least let's take the example of volcanic eruption, the latest volcanic eruption in Bali, in Mount Agung, in which some people have to be relocated temporarily. Of course, this is temporarily, but during the relocation or when they have to stay in the temporary camp, they cannot perform their daily works, daily activities, daily business. So, of course, their status will fall into a lower income category. And of course, it will create the pressure to the poverty itself. And then we still have different types of natural disaster. It could be flood, it could be landslide that happens all around Indonesia. So we need to deal with this, and whenever the natural disaster strikes, then of course we have to deal with a possibility of poverty increase. And then of course inequality through the labor market. So those 4 are the key factors why inequality occurs, at least in Indonesia. So now, the question, if there is more advancement in the digital transformation itself, will technology be stepping stone for poorer workers to catch up and share the benefits of growth? That's of course the positive possibility. But it could be the other way around. Will technology reinforce the existing gaps, allowing higher earners to earn even more and drive inequality even higher? So this is very critical question, and of course we cannot, unfortunately, I don't think we can find the so-called the compromise situation in which there will be, higher penetration of digital economy, but at the same time, inequality might improve. Of course, this is very ideal, but let's deal with these two extreme possibility. Okay, so as we all know, Industrial Revolution 4.0 currently going on. And by Industrial Revolution 4.0, we are talking about digitalization, automatization, and then, of course, the most advanced would be artificial intelligence. And at the same time, Indonesia needs to transform our economy from natural resource-based economy into more value-added creation economy or into more manufacturing-based economy. So we need to increase the portion of manufacturing or to increase the portion of modern services. But if you are talking more manufacturing activities, more modern services, in which they have to be competitive in the international market, I don't think we can promote too much, for example, labor-intensive manufacturing. I don't think we can promote too much labor-intensive services activities. So, the question now, how we can make the balance between, at one side, the needs to transform into manufacturing, but on the other end, we also need to reduce the unemployment. I forgot to mention, our unemployment rate today, the latest data, is 5.4%. And this is open unemployment. This is not full unemployment. This is open unemployment, 5.4%. This year, we hope we can bring it down to close to 5%. But then, if you want to reduce the unemployment, but at the same time, we need to move to the sectors that really focusing on the technology in order to maintain competitiveness, then of course it will be quite challenging. So, at one side, as written in the slide, it will increase productivity and efficiency for sure, and also bringing ease and convenience to us, to customers. But at the same time, inappropriate responses could bring threat to the nature of work. Meaning that if we can just simplify by just transforming drastically from natural resource-based and more labor-intensive economy into more digitalized economy or automated economy, then at the same time we can bring the threat to the employment. And then inability to adapt will hinder our efforts in reducing inequality. So this is choice. Are we going into fully to the Industrial Revolution 4.0, or we need to deal with still basic development issue, namely unemployment, inequality, as well as poverty. So let's see the impact. I mean, of course, this is kind of projection or impact analysis of digital technology to the labor market. And let me quote the study done by the McKinsey in 2016 for Indonesia. The study indicated with the advancement of Industrial Revolution 4.0, or basically the digital economy, 52.6 million jobs will be potentially replaced in Indonesia. 52.6 million jobs. And of course, this is almost 50% of our labor force. So this is very serious threats. Again, this is just prediction, this is just analysis, but again, we need to take into account the possible impact of the digital economy. And 60% occupation in the world, generally, will use automatization, and 30% occupation in the world will be replaced by high-tech machine. So clearly, as I mentioned before, if we move suddenly to manufacturing sector that need to be competitive and not labor-intensive type of manufacturing, then of course, we cannot generate too many job opportunities for our young and new labor force. And don't forget, Indonesia now is experiencing demographic bonus. And the peak of the bonus will be in 2030, when our dependency ratio is around 46%, currently around 49 to 48%. And this demographic bonus will end around 2045. So, of course, we only have 28 years. In these 28 years, we need to upgrade our economy from middle income, lower middle income right now, hopefully to the high income economy. But at the same time, we have this issue. 53 million jobs potentially be replaced because of the automatization or Industrial Revolution 4.0. But the same study, the McKinsey study in 2016, also indicated there will be 3.7 million new jobs due to the rise of digital economy in the next 7 years in Indonesia. So, 53 million jobs gone. Unfortunately, only 3.7 million created or generated. So if you do a simple, benefit cost analysis, it will be still the big loss in terms of employment opportunities for Indonesia. And then in terms of the e-commerce itself, there was $6 billion total revenue of e-commerce in Indonesia, and 78% current internet users already made online purchasing. And then Indonesia's e-commerce estimated to grow by 18% annually in the next 5 years and contributing additional $35 billion to our GDP. So let's focus on the labor market because this is part of the development issue, unemployment. This is not about the digital economy, but this is more about labor market situation in Indonesia. In Indonesia in general, employers mean the person who created the jobs, struggle to find employees with the right skills. So this is the fact. We still have 5% or 5.4% open unemployment, but on the other end, employers struggle to find employees with the right skill. There was high labor movement in the service sector for the past 20 years. 43% labor movement in 97, 56% now labor movement in service sector. And the need of skilled worker, only 38% 2015, but 2045, it has to be around 90% if Indonesia wants to be an advanced country or high-income country. So clearly, Indonesia will need to have more middle and high-skilled workers. So we have to upgrade the quality of our workers, not only low-level, low-skill, but more importantly, it has to be up to the middle, or it's better if it is high-skilled worker. So what are the strategic policies to improve the skilled workers? Still looking at the current condition. First, again, this is more internal Indonesia, we need to enhance the training curricula for improving soft skill and hard skill. I think everybody in the room understand about the issue. Secondly, I think this is more relevant for Indonesia because it's not yet established well to promote competency-based vocational training and apprenticeship program. Of course, it might have happened in your respective countries, especially in the advanced economies, but then in Indonesia, it's still behind. We don't have good vocational training, and apprenticeship program is also very rare to make the conclusion. And then the third policy will be to improve qualification, requirement, and the operation of professional certification institutions across the country. So this is the strategy in which now we in the government trying to not really duplicate or copy, but trying to follow the Germany system of vocational training. I think looking at the experience from Germany, in which our president already paid a visit, we need to basically overhaul not only our vocational training or vocational education system, but also the apprenticeship program. Looking at the German experience, we can conclude that apprenticeship program, internship program, is very much critical to improve the skill and knowledge of employees or potential employees in general. And then, of course, we need to revise the existing curriculum of our vocational training, because our current vocational training, except in the few schools, still adopts the old type of curriculum. They didn't really take into account, for example, the IT into their curriculum. So any graduate from vocational school, especially at the high school level, they're still struggling to cope with the demand from employers that related to the IT skills. So this is one area in which we need to improve our vocational education. And of course, with this G20 initiative led by the current President Argentina, that trying to put the issue of digital economy. So I believe number one that need to be focused during the 2018, during the Argentina presidency in the G20, is the impact of digital economy to the inequality, like our seminar today. But I think number two is how can we deal with this potential high unemployment due to the existence of Industrial Revolution 4.0 as well as digital economy. I think this is very serious for countries that still experiencing demographic bonus like Indonesia, or countries that still have big young population. For example, in the G20 members, Saudi Arabia is one of the countries that has relatively high young population. They still need place to work. They still need jobs. But then, looking at the current situation, like also in Indonesia, now we have to deal with the issue of how we can, properly train our incoming labor force and making sure they will survive in the future employment situation and in the future competition. So this is not an easy task, but I believe today's seminar, I think, will contribute something, at least to us in Indonesia, how to deal with the digital economy related to inequality, and how to deal with the digital economy related to the issue of potential unemployment. And those two are clearly very politically sensitive topic for any government in the world: unemployment and inequality. So I really hope the panel's distinguished speakers will share their knowledge, experience, expertise to help all G20, not only all G20 members, but all emerging economies as well as developing economies, to define how we can develop, let's say, our short-term, medium-term, as well as long-term planning when we have to deal with this Industrial Revolution 4.0. For me, as a Minister of National Development Planning, and now I was assigned by the President to make our long-term vision of 2045, 100 years of our independence, our main challenge actually is how to define the world, including Indonesia, in 2045. Because, to be honest, it's hard to make prediction of the impact of the advancement in this digital technology or digital economy. it's really struggling. I mean, we never realized that the advancement of digital economy is so quick and sometimes unpredictable. It's hard to anticipate what's going to happen, not only in the 10 years ahead, but even maybe a year ahead, given the, the size of the advancement in this industrial revolution, automatization, and digitalization. So I think this is a good forum. I mean, G20 will be a good forum to make sure the so-called the technology expert having good discussion with the economists, because otherwise the economists will think that the world will be like what we have today. But I believe the technology expert will say the world will be totally different in the next year, 5 years, or even 20 years. So with this, I would like to end my presentation. And again, I would like to congratulate all the speakers, congratulate the Ministry of Finance for having this event, and thanks to participation for speakers from around the world. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, His Excellency, for the speech. Please kindly remain on the stage, as I am pleased to invite all of the speakers and moderators, and also His Majesty Sri Paduka Paku Alam X, Mr. Rionald Silaban, to come on the stage for a group photo session. Again, I would like to invite all speakers and moderators from all panels, panel 1, 2, and 3, to come on the stage for a group photo session. Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellencies, all speakers and moderators. You may go back to the seat. And before we continue to the session 1, I request the pleasure of Mr. Rionald Silaban and Mr. Swahasil Nazara to proceed to the foyer of the ballroom for press conference. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to also inform you that the internet access could be accessed by Wi-Fi under the name Tentrem 3 or Ballroom Tentrem with the same username and password. And now we continue the first session of the seminar. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now I invite the moderator for session 1. Acting as moderator for this session is Ms. Vivi Alatas. Ms. Vivi Alatas is lead economist of World Bank's Poverty Program in Indonesia. As a reminder, you can all actively participate in this discussion by raising questions through slido.com using hashtag VTI-Seminar-G20. Now I am handing over the proceeding to Ms. Vivi Alatas.
The future of work is changing rapidly, influenced by two mega trends. One is constantly increasing global connectivity. The volume of international movement of capital has increased 24-fold in the last 30 years. Digital information traffic in 2012 was 500 times larger than in 2000. At the same time, we also have a rapid pace of technological change. It took 38 years for radio to reach 50 million users. For television, 13 years. For Facebook, 1 year. There are 5.2 billion mobile phones worldwide, and 7 billion people live in area with mobile phone coverage. Companies are harnessing new technologies. We have mobile, online businesses, Amazon, Alibaba, the sharing economy, Airbnb, Uber. Machine learning and automation are forces that impact how work is done and what kind of skills are valued. These mega trends can be a blessing for countries. Countries can harness new technologies to improve innovation, accelerate productivity, and improve service delivery, making new things, making things cheaper, making things better. Countries can access more workers, more capitals, and larger market. The internet can make government more capable, more responsive, through expansions of participations and voices. But they can also be a curse for inequality in these countries. Half of the global populations does not have access to internet. Yes, global connectivity can lead to more resources, but also more competitions. Individual, firms, and countries will lose to the more skilled, more advanced, and more capable. Winner-take-all phenomena. The question that we should be trying to address are how can all workers adapt to this changing world? How can G20 countries, especially emerging countries, harness these trends not only for increasing growth, increasing economy, but also for shared prosperity? What are the technologies that can help the poor? For that, in these sessions, we have distinguished panels that will give us answers to these million-dollar questions. So I would like to invite Bapak Hatib Basri, Bapak Pungki Sumadi, Mr. Rana Hassan, and Mr. Toshan Tamhane to come to the stage. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to start with Toshan Tamhane, senior partner of McKinsey. Toshan, can you give us insight? What are the opportunities and challenges faced by the poor within countries in this G20, especially in the emerging economies? And what are the emerging technologies that can increase the welfare of the poor, can be used to address inequality?
Hello, good morning. Terima kasih banyak to the organizers and distinguished guests. I think Pa Bambang summarized it very well in his presentation when he said, we live in extremely strange and uncertain times. Okay? And why do we say we in strange and uncertain times? For various reasons. If you look at, for example, the largest hotelier has no rooms. Okay? The largest operator of transport has no cars themselves. And you can keep going on industry after industry. What you thought was your business is not your business anymore. Okay? If you look at every aspect of the business cycle, whether it is asset ownership, whether it is distribution, production cycles, the before and after is dramatically changing, is dramatically shifting. Okay? I won't spend time on all of this. I think Ibu mentioned it, Pa Bambang mentioned it adequately. I'm actually going to shift to a very different aspect. As McKinsey, we believe that there are 13 technologies which are going to transform the world. Okay, 13. Each of these technologies impact, by the way, we don't know and we cannot size the impact of all of them. So far, everything that we have seen in the public eye, most of it is from the mobile internet. Okay, all the things that you saw of ordering taxis, food, everything is of social media is just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, there are several technologies and you can take any one of them. Just take 3D printing. 3D printing in industries can reduce cost of manufacturing by 70%. Okay, 70. It's not 17, 20, 30. Blockchain and cryptocurrency. I think if it go, you know, of course now cryptocurrency always, regulators are very uncertain, very uncomfortable. Will it make national currencies redundant? Will it make the business of banks obsolete? Because you need banks for cross-border and you now use Ripple and use P2P and blockchain, you're actually going to make several businesses redundant. Now what is very clear is often we overestimate as humans. We have a tendency to overestimate what happens in 1 year but underestimate what happens in 5. Okay? We think all of this will happen next year. No, it's not. By the way, even if you take genomics, it took the Human Genomics Project 13 years and $4 billion to sequence the human gene. Okay? Now it takes few hours and $150. Okay? From $3 billion to $150, the rate at which technology is advancing, none of us could have predicted it. Okay? And yet, what's the impact of this on equality? Okay? And I think at one level, if you looked at it 5 years back, the rich had drivers, chauffeurs. Today, all the mass market, mass affluent, you can order. If you don't like your chauffeur, you give him a low rating. Okay? The rich send their servants to buy food. Today, the poor can actually order it and the food comes home. Okay? If you looked at the big giants, okay, and you said, okay, you needed scale, you needed capital to compete, you needed capital to be going cross-border. On Facebook, in 2016 end, you had 72 million SMEs, small and medium enterprises, which actually did cross-border exports. Okay? So you no longer need to be a large manufacturer to send to other countries. In 1980, there were only 23 corporations in the Fortune 500 which were based in emerging markets. Okay? Only 23 out of 500, less than 5%. Okay? Today, that number has already crossed 85, and we believe in the next 5 to 10 years, half of the corporations in the Fortune 500 will be from emerging countries. What has made that possible? Okay? Look at Indonesia. Okay? Indonesia already has 6 unicorns, okay, in the digital commerce, the way you traditionally define it. Okay? You do not need to be large, you do not need to be located in the right geographies because of technology. It has enabled equality in many ways than we would have thought. And yet, everything is not good. Okay. I think if we looked at the G20 GDP growth rate between 1964 and 2014, 3.5% growth was enabled by productivity growth accounted for half of it and employment accounted for half of it. If we look at the next 50 years going forward, at least our estimate is even if you wanted to keep the GDP per capita of G20 the same, a lot of it is going to come from productivity. Okay? And we do not know as of now, where is this productivity gain? 1.4% of the 2.8, like half of it is actually going to be demonstrated by existing technologies, but not all of it. So we have a productivity gap, and more importantly, will we have jobless productivity growth? So that's a big question on the macro policy front. Now, of course, if you look at, this is a Daimler truck, and you think that the driver is driving, but he's not. He's actually just doing stuff on his computer. Is this future? It's here. In Jurong, ExxonMobil's plant on Jurong Island in Singapore, you actually have driverless transportation of vehicles from one building to another. It will not take time for all of that to actually get into the normal roads. And the impact of some of these autonomous vehicles and near autonomous vehicles, where the driver is not driving all the time, but can actually do a lot of other things. It's positive, negative, but employment will definitely be impacted. Okay? And our starting position is not so good. So if you look at the working population, which is underutilized, 35% of the working age population in G15 is inactive or underutilized. A lot of youth, and this is LinkedIn statistics, 75 million youth who are officially unemployed. On LinkedIn, 37% of the people say that their jobs do not use their skill sets adequately. And then on top of it, to add, you have the issue of migrant labor. Okay, migrant workforce, where in the last 50 years, or so last 15 years, 40% of the workforce in G20 has been people who are not born there. So the starting position on employment statistics is not good. You add to that, I think Pa Bambang referred to a different version of this slide, is there are several occupations that we see. So if you look at some occupations here where 100% of the activities are going to be sort of automated, you won't need humans. All the way you have some activities where automation is 60%, 50%, and very few where automation is not going to be impacting jobs. Okay, so across occupational categories. Okay, the impact of that on the workforce, we believe 1.1 billion people across China, India, US, a lot of the other countries are going to feel the impact of this automation. Okay, and it doesn't matter who you are. You could be a clerk, you could be a groundkeeping worker, or a CEO. Certain aspects of your job are going to go away. That's given. Okay, I'll skip some of this slides. The pace at which this automation will happen, of course, depends on a whole host of things, and yet not all is lost. Okay, I'm going to skip these slides. What will happen is we will see a shift in terms of the skills required. Cognitive abilities in terms of generating novel patterns, being more creative. Okay, social reasoning, problem solving is going to get a lot more emphasis. Social and emotional abilities are going to get a lot more emphasis. Physical abilities and sensory perception, sensing, is going to keep going down. Google Brain, by the way, and a slide that I skipped, this is an interesting one. In 2011, Google Brain could identify a cheetah with all kinds of pictorial and AI applications with a 26% error. Okay, looking at any part and seeing, is it a cheetah or is it not? Humans were happy, because humans can do that with 5% error. Now Google Brain does it with 3% errors. Okay, so the kind of advancements that you are seeing are going to make a lot of our job sets, and by the way, what kids learn in school, obsolete or irrelevant. Okay, I'm going to skip this. And yet, why am I personally very optimistic? Look at the US data in terms of occupation and employment over the last 150 years. The red bar, so the green bar here was agriculture. Most of the US population was doing agriculture. Over time, the share of agriculture came down, manufacturing has increased, trade has increased. So occupations replace each other. Okay? Yes, if you look at even data more recent times, 2015, and you looked at the jobs in the personal computing industry, a lot more jobs were created than destroyed. It's just the profile of those jobs keeps shifting. Okay. And again, we don't need to look at current data. We can go back several years when Henry Ford's Model T was being produced. As you saw, as the production increased, the number of employees that were employed by Ford Motor Company increased. And what happened in the external market? Price fell down, but demand increased, okay, to compensate for business. So it is not as if with technology, automation happens and people start just going out of business. People need to adapt and shift. And as humans, we have demonstrated remarkable resilience in doing it. Okay. Again, we looked at over a long period of time across US, Germany, and China. We looked at periods where there is increasing productivity, increasing employment, increasing productivity and decreasing employment. So if you look at different spans of time and said over an annual period, over a 3-year period, a 5-year period, Did productivity and employment both go up? Did one go up, another go down, or did both go down? Okay. So if you looked at the US, 79% of periods in that history which were annual, productivity and employment both increased. Okay. 95% over a 3-year period, 5% of the times there was decreasing employment. In China, we have not seen that situation even once. Okay. Employment and productivity are going up at the same time most of the times. Okay. Again, statistical evidence, jobs will shift, productivity and employment, we adapt very rapidly. It takes some time, there is a temporary period of displacement which affects individual industries. So what can we do about it? I think at least our belief is to create an equity-oriented economy, there are 3 broad pillars. First is accelerating technology adoption in existing sectors. Okay? That's a given, it's here and now. Second is capturing new value from digital businesses. Digital businesses in G20 generate 2.5 times more employment per dollar deployed as it is in the offline sector. So the job creation propensity is significantly higher of digital because of the secondary and tertiary effects. The ecosystem impact of job creation is much higher than the narrowed, siloed impact of job losses. And the last one is the next-gen ICT as an engine of growth. Of course, there are a whole host of talent, innovation, infrastructure and policy enablers we would need to put in place. What do I mean by that? The last slide. I think first is create incentives for private sector investment in human capital. Around the world, policymakers have understood how to treat incentives of financial capital. But incentives for human capital is still an iffy gray area. We haven't figured that fully. Public-private partnerships to stimulate investment in enabling digital infrastructure. The policymakers cannot do it alone, private sector cannot do it alone. The match is critical. Rethinking incomes in a world of automation. What happens as the job content intensity of an individual goes down? How do you think of wages? Do you need some minimum wage standards, universal wage obligations? Transition support. People will shift jobs more and more. How do you think of safety nets for this transitionary workforce? Technology solutions for labor market. How do you adapt and match demand and supply requirements? And finally, the last one, which is innovate how humans work alongside machines. Your co-workers may not be humans. It will impact social life in your workforce. I don't think all of us fully understand what it will mean to have a robot as your best friend when you're working whatever work that you do. In a nutshell, yes, we will be impacted. If history is anything to go by, we will adapt. Okay? Yet the pace of adaptation will depend on the actions that both policymakers and the government will take. Thank you.
Thank you, Tosan, for an optimistic future look. I think that we need that. And I would like to ask Pak Khatib Basri on one of the points that Tosan made, which is the starting position is not inviolable. And when we look within G20 countries, we are not on equal footings in terms of like harnessing this technology. So for Indonesia, how is Indonesia compared to other G20s in terms of the capability to harness this technology? And who should Indonesia look to emulate and how?
Thank you very much, Evie. I think this is a very important question. But before I respond to your question, let me start by asking a question first. Yeah. For a member of the G20s, I think the most serious threat for us, as we listen from Minister Brojonegoro and also Tosan from his presentation, is about the threat of job losses and also inequality. But let me try to be more optimistic than McKinsey this time, Tosan. Because I believe that we've been through the situation like this. This is not only the first time. We've been through the first industrial revolution, in which that at that time people also predicted that there will be a job losses massive job losses, inequality, and we survived the first industrial revolution. What happened, if you look at from the history, there were some job losses, but not entirely. And it is very interesting to look at the new development now. Look at Amazon. Amazon now is inroad into the physical stores. They are experimenting on the physical stores. Why Amazon is doing this? If you look at Alibaba just invested about $2.9 billion into the hypermarket. So maybe the equilibrium, we never know about it. Yeah, we don't really know what will happen in the future. Maybe the equilibrium will be somehow in between the offline and the online as well. So the issue of the job threat is there, but maybe not as scary as what we thought. I think this question is very important first before the G20 countries can respond. Now, if that's the case, then what happened to the job, to the threat of the job losses? I think what's going to happen is redefinition of job. The skill sets like nurse, like accountant will continue to be there, but need to be re-equipped with the new skill sets, with this understanding about the big data and also the technology. So maybe the job is still there, but will require the new skill sets. And how do Indonesia look at this position? I think, as you know, happened to many members of the G20, the most crucial issues to anticipate the situation is how to improve the quality of the human capital. Unfortunately, Fifi, Indonesia, we do have a problem because if you look at our PISA score, Indonesia is probably not in a very good shape, even though there is some improvement in the last couple of years. If I'm not mistaken, we were at the bottom 5 maybe or 6. Yeah, so we need to sort of like to emphasize on the issue of this improvement of the quality of human capital. And probably we can learn from other countries, experience a member of G20, how Korea, for example, focus on the issue of this improving the quality of human capital. What China is doing in terms of this quality of human capital. The problem is the government has a limited resources for this because we don't have enough resources through our fiscal. Probably government also has a limited capacity to train people. If you introduce sort of like government training center, there is a risk that every graduate from government training center need to be retrained again, because the equipment does not match with the reality in the company. So my suggestion is, as a member of the G20, we probably need to think about it. Maybe we should ask the participation of the private sector to get involved on this process of the improvement of the quality of human capital. For example, like, let's do on-the-job training. And to incentivize them to do the on-the-job trainings, why don't we give like double deduction of tax if they do training? Why don't we give a sort of like a tax break if this provide a vocational training? Because that will be the answer in the future. That's the first one as a member of the G20. The second one, the most serious issue to me, because if you look at the history of the first industrial revolution, we end up with the technology improve the welfare of the people. Yeah, if we are talking about the long term, the issue is more on the temporary adjustment, that process. But I do have another concern. If we believe with what Robert Baldwin said about the great convergence, yeah, then there will be a great convergence between the advanced country and developing countries, because the know-how, the know-how product will be, the advanced country will be focused on the know-how products in the advanced country, whereas the developing countries will focus on the labor-intensive sector. Then there will be a great convergence. The biggest issue is about inequality. How do we handle the issue of inequality? And if you look at the recent development about what happened in the US, what happened in Brexit, what happened in Indonesia, in many countries in Asia, there is somehow resistance towards globalization. Because globalization, I think maybe part of it is mistake made by the economists. We fail to to communicate to the people, to resonate the benefit of this globalization. But if you look at from the ASEAN country perspective, the one who get a benefit from this globalization is basically the East Asian countries. Look at what happened to the East Asian countries before 90s and after they joined, they participate in the globalization. So my second point is, it is important to ensure that the member, as a member of G20, we continue to work on this open trade regime. Because somehow it will provide much room for a country, developing countries like us, to get a benefit of it. If we're talking about this globalization, the complaint mostly comes from the advanced countries now. But East Asian countries, they get a benefit of it. Of course, then the next question is, what will be the compensation for the losers? And I think in this part is the role of the government become very important. I don't know, I would like to hear later on what about the idea of taxing the robots, yeah, in order to ensure that the labor-intensive sector will be protected. The second one I mentioned earlier is providing the training to participate, to ask the private sector to do it. And the third one is, of course, the social assistance. Because what I'm afraid is the unskilled labor will be definitely affected by this. So with that, I think that's the preparation that we need. Unfortunately, we cannot make a sort of like, we don't really have the data, yeah, for this, because this is maybe unprecedented about how to anticipate this, current changing of the Industrial Revolution 4.0. Maybe the situation is probably even faster than the Industrial Revolution 1.0, but at least I do believe that if we do some anticipation for this, then maybe at least we could mitigate or minimize the impact. Thanks.
I would like to follow with Pak Pungki. Tosan also mentioned about humans show remarkable ability to adapt. Has there been any observed recipes in technological adaptations? And how can we adjust the recipe for countries that have lower share of skilled workers, high poverty rate?
Thank you, Bu Vivi. The recipes, I think that number one, as government, we need to make sure that infrastructure is ready. So what we have done, and it is stated in our 5-year plan, is, for example, we increase the provision of the infrastructure services for internet around Indonesia, and this is what we call it the Palapa Ring projects. There is the Western Palapa Ring and Eastern Palapa Ring. And we also promote investment of the private sectors in establishing better IT services around the country. And the second thing, the government introduced the better public service through technological advancements. For example, the former Jakarta government introduced the CLUE system, online reporting system, for whatever daily problems we encountered as a Jakarta residents. So, for example, there is a road breakdown near my house, and then I just use 3 SMS to report the problems to the governor, and within 1 week, somebody came and fixed it up. And we also need to introduce technology in our government services. For example, e-procurement. Ibu Risma, the current mayor of Surabaya, is actually the pioneer who introduced e-procurement 10 years ago. And it created lots of productivity in the government services in Surabaya. Now we are using it most in Indonesian cities. For example, also that passport, in-person process for passport. 5 years ago, it took 1 day. To do the passport, and then it only take about 15 minutes. Last week, my wife extended the car registration. 3-5 years ago, it took about 1 day, 1 full day for extending the car registration. Last week, my wife did it only for 4 minutes. Only for 4 minutes through drive-through system in the local police offices. And also, at the wider level, we restructure the curricula for 11 types of occupations. We work very closely with the industry and the academic communities, universities, to at least restructure the curriculum how we teach IT in the 11 types of occupation. For example, tourism, four-wheel vehicle industry, telecommunication, animation, construction, electrical engineering, and etc. So with this, we would like to make sure that actually for each level of jobs, we will have the right skill based on the right competence to do the jobs there. And at the society level, actually, regulators require the introduction of new technologies to be available in the operation of whatever, business operations, for example. Now we have fintech available, we have e-money, we have e-wallet system, we have also branchless banking. So this is actually what we have seen so far, and it is also now if you go, if you come to Yogyakarta from Soekarno-Hatta, you can see now there is a booth for the online check-in system. On top of the online internet check-in system. So this kind of things that I think we need to keep on doing as the government, so that people will be able to understand, hey, there is some kind of pressure from the government to use better technology for our daily public services. And how we should adapt about this? Of course, actually, on top of the infrastructure readiness, we need to make sure that the cyber security is also there. Yeah, because otherwise, lots of fraud from the financial technological advancements will always in front of us. Yeah, and we need to make sure that actually the cyber security readiness is also available, not only in big cities, but also at the rural levels. We also need to constant and use the persistence effort to introduce and use easy and simple technological advancement in the workplace. So these kind of things that I believe would make us better adapt to the technological advancements, and also introduce new things to the people, even though there are technology gap, but somehow we have to do it. And one thing that I think very important, we are trying now to introduce our community facilitators working in our poverty reduction programs, knowing about how fintech is available for them. And because actually those who do not have enough education and easy access to technological advancements will be having difficulties in using, for example, e-money. So community facilitators needs to be there to work with them. So this is actually some of the recipes that we have in our program right now. Thank you.
Rana, Pungki mentions about the importance of participations, both from the government and from the community. Based on your research and ADB findings, what are the necessary conditions to ensure broader participations? And how does this impact across sectors? And also, Pak Hati Basri mentions about the convergence or divergence in the employment outlook between AEs and EMEs, emerging markets. What do you think? Please, please do.
I'm going to skip some of these slides to just get really straight to the point. These have to do with inequality, but let's look at this issue of broadening the participation, and it is ultimately linked to this issue of inequality. Basically, you can look at these issues really from a jobs perspective. You can look at inequality in terms of where are people working and how much do they make. And how much they make depends a lot on productivity. And so what you have here are these charts which basically show on the horizontal axis the percentage of workers employed in a particular sector. On the vertical axis, you're basically looking at the labor productivity within each sector relative to the national average. And what you see is, you see from our Asia-Pacific region, you've got Korea on the upper right, and just below that you've got Indonesia. And when you compare these two countries, you see this interesting pattern, which actually is quite common in terms of the advanced economy pattern versus the developing country pattern, and that is you have a mass of workers. In this case, agriculture in particular in Indonesia in 2010 was employing almost about 40% workers, and it was employing them at a level of labor productivity which was about 10% of the national average. So mass of workers, very low productivity. And so when we're thinking about the fourth industrial revolution, or in fact we'd say even the first to third, because you have a lot of the region which has not actually caught up in terms of adopting fully the previous industrial revolutions, you're seeing potentially huge opportunities, especially in a sector like agriculture. And so that's one of the things that ADB in fact is doing. It's looking at how you can take agriculture, how to introduce precision technologies, how to introduce the Internet of Things to basically improve the productivity of farms, and simple things like just information. So we all know that the agriculture sector is one where markets actually do not work well. Farmers do not have access to information about prices, about what others are doing, and so if there's one thing about the fourth industrial revolution that's terrific, it's that it really reduces prices and transaction costs in accessing markets. And that's what we think, that there's actually a huge scope. And once you start raising the productivity of that big band towards the left, you're actually going to see beneficial effects on the distribution of income coming in from the lower tail. So that's one issue. The broader point is simply you've got to essentially move workers to sectors with higher productivity, and firms and farms with higher productivity. There's a chart, the upper chart is one from India, where what we've been able to do with the Indian data is just look at the manufacturing sector, both the formal and the informal. And what you see very clearly is a worker employed in the formal sector gets paid more, a worker in a larger firm gets paid more. Now, through the labor force statistics, you can actually try to control for workers' education, gender, experience. The bottom line is that the premium to working in a firm that is productive is, the wage premium is pretty high. So the question that this brings us to is how do you make that first thing happen? How do you get jobs being generated in the higher productivity sectors and higher productivity firms? And of course, you need, number one, high productivity firms. So in any policy that you have in an economy which is actually impeding the growth of firms, it's impeding the formalization of firms, is probably getting you too many firms of low productivity. The second is you need the workers who have the skills to carry this out. And the photograph at the bottom actually shows this. It shows a lot of automation, and that thing that I've highlighted in red is basically, it's about information metrics. Modern plants, modern technology requires a lot of information flows to be taking place on the shop floor, exchange of information between workers, and essentially that whiteboard that's been read out over there is essentially, it's about providing workers information. Who's doing what on the assembly line, how much are they doing, what are the targets, who's achieving what. And you can't have that when you have workers with very low capacity to process information. Now, the big dilemma, of course, is that, to get higher productivity, you need stuff like on the left photograph. You need, so that's a spreading machine that's used commonly in all modern apparel factories. It spreads the cloth very evenly. You can use modern technologies to cut quickly, accurately, etc. So you need that, but the problem is if you go really to the limit and you get to the Adidas shoe factory where you do not need any workers, you have a problem. But I think we're really very, very far away from that right-hand side. And moreover, I think coming to the case of Asia, if you start looking at the issue of robots, the statistics are showing, yes, the shipments of robots in Asia are really skyrocketing now. A lot of that is driven by China. But if you start looking at the sectors where this is happening, it's actually happening in sectors which are very capital intensive. So you've got huge amounts of robots being installed in automotives, electronics, chemical plants. You don't have that many workers there in the first place. If you look at the right-hand side of that chart, the two blue dots are basically your large employment shares. That's stuff like textiles, food and beverages. That's where your workers are. That's not where the robots are. Now, true, the robots are getting more and more sophisticated, but I think, I don't want to hazard a guess of being, say, 5 years. I think Toshan made a very, very good point that you tend to overestimate today and you underestimate what's going to happen 5 years down the road. But essentially, the fairly low wages that you see in these very labor-intensive industries is protecting. This is a chart which is basically just showing you that, again, the big use of robots as the large-sized bubbles are where you have the highest wages. So once again, what this is basically saying is that just because something is technically feasible does not mean it's going to be economically feasible or it's going to be adopted. Quick point that was raised by Toshan and Pak Chabri also is automation leads to higher productivity does not necessarily mean employment is going to go down. In fact, the chart on the left is ATM machines. This has become a canonical example, but always good to consider. You've got ATMs being introduced from around 1980 in the United States. The prediction was bank tellers' jobs will go. In fact, when you look at the blue line, yes, it's true that bank tellers increase employment marginally, but they go on increasing. And the reason is that the price of opening a bank branch declines dramatically, bank branches spread, and very importantly, bank tellers start taking up new tasks. So yes, they don't need to sit around count money, but what they can do is they can go ahead and work with the community, work with small, medium enterprises, and try to work out banking solutions for their problems. The other three charts are actually quite interesting. They tell us over a much wider span of history from the United States what happened in three sectors where you had huge amounts of machinery coming in the 19th century. So that's textiles, that's steel, and then later on in the 20th century, automotives. And in each case, you tend to see this inverted U. So you've got a lot of technological progress, and you've got employment going up. It's only after a certain point kicks in where you start to see employment going down. And now, when we think about developing Asia, we see no real reason why the region might not be at that part, the left side of those distributions. That is, this is a region which is urbanizing. It's a region where people are moving from traditional clothing to more modern clothing. They're increasing the number of shirts they have, the number of trousers they want to wear, etc., etc. They just want, they want more of things. Demand for manufactured products has not gotten saturated yet. So still quite some ways to go. I want to show this chart. It's a bit complicated, but it's a point that Pak Chabri brought up, and I think it's something. We've seen these examples from the United States that in 1900, 40% of occupations in the U.S. were farmers. Today it's 2%. Many new occupations came up. Now, we were thinking about this issue in the Asian context, and it struck us that you could actually take many parts of Asia today, split them into leading and lagging regions, places where you don't have that much migration, and you could ask the same question. And in fact, when we do that, so this is an example from India, and what we do is we take up India and we break it up into states which have higher incomes, which have more non-routine occupations, where you have better electricity, better roads, all these industrial revolutions 1, 2, 3 have taken place, and what you find is, yes, you have all these more modern occupations. The good news is the unemployment rates across both regions is the same. It's about 3%. And yet, labor market outcomes in every conceivable way that you can measure are much better in the leading regions. So you've got less low-paid agriculture. You have fewer workers in the formal sector. You have more non-routine jobs. And the best part is wages. Median wages are about 52% higher in these leading regions. And even at the 25th percentile, wages are around around the same, about 50% higher. Now, what is true is inequality tends to be higher in the leading regions, but I would tend to argue that at the stage of development we're at, we really need to be also thinking about that bottom 40 or 50%, which is maybe not necessarily living below the extreme poverty line of, let's say, $1.9 a day in PPP terms. You've also got to be thinking about people who are living below the $5 a day poverty line, which is a poverty line which is very typical of national poverty lines in upper middle income economies. There is always a worry, again it was raised in both presentations, about wages. And again, history shows us that in the 19th century, when all this good stuff, mechanization was taking place, you had this long 3 to 4 decade period where wages were fairly flat. In the British context, it's called Engels' pause. In the chart over here, this is from the US, you see something very similar. Now, what's very interesting is to dig deeper into what caused this wage stagnation. Now, there are lots of stories out there. Profit rates needed to be high because capitalists needed to be investing a lot. But there's also a story about skills. And essentially, it's that you didn't have skills, technologies that were standardized. You didn't have a system for delivering those skills in a standardized way, and you didn't have certification of skills that was agreed upon by everyone. And why that's extremely important is because it's essentially tied to the bargaining power of workers. So once you start having skills that can be delivered in a standardized way, technology that's getting a bit standardized, and certification systems which are agreed upon by employers and unions and workers, you actually begin to see workers being able to get more of the slice of the cake. I'm going to end right now. Vivi's been signaling, but I just want to make a couple of points, Vivi. Flexibility in land, capital, and labor markets is really important, especially in an era where you have very uncertain technologies. You do not know where exactly the big gains are going to come in. And in that context, I would say that Indonesia and India are two countries in this region which have fairly inflexible labor regulations, especially when it comes to issues like dismissal, perhaps to some extent the minimum wage issue, and then forms of employment contracts. We are seeing more and more informal type of contracts. People talk about the gig economy, etc. Those kinds of things are not consistent with a lot of the labor code. So we really need to think very seriously about that. Last point on social protection, there's this concept of protected mobility, that is, don't try to protect the job, because you do not know whether that job is going to be needed 2-3 years from now. Protect the worker. And in doing that, actually technology helps a lot, because technology, especially of national ID systems which are working well, which are privacy concerns addressed, you can track workers, formal, informal, and you can actually start providing them the needed benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana, for giving us more reasons to be more optimistic. Pak Hatip Basri, in terms of like this creation, more productivity, more jobs, competitions, innovations, what are the kind of regulations needed? Do we need different kind of regulation?
Thank you, Fifi. Now let me share my concern. I don't think the regulators can repeat the same old way of thinking to address this issue, because the modern technology, the digital technology, come up with something that never been precedented before. Let me give an example for those of you who are doing economics. In economics, we learned that almost impossible to introduce the so-called perfect price discrimination, because the information is limited. It's not possible to customize something individually because the problem of the asymmetric information. But nowadays, with the big data, I won't be surprised, even if the insurance, it could be tailored to individual need. Not only, we don't need to pay the premium for about 1 year, maybe only for a few hours or day. because we really know about the profile of everyone. I won't be surprised if a couple years from now, the interest rate introduced by the banking sector could be different from one individual to other individual. Because we know the credit score, we know the big data, we know the behavior. Then the next question is, how does the regulators position themselves? Because there is no way for them to regulate everything until the very detail. Can you imagine that the product cycle is getting shorter? If you introduce the regulation, the next day your regulation will be obsolete. Then what is the role of the government, of the regulators? I don't know the answer, but maybe my guess is, what will happen? Maybe the regulators should change their mind to focus on agree on principles rather than agree on rules. Because if you start to sort of like to issue the regulation on every rules, that you prevent innovation to happen. But let's say, for example, I don't know, on the financial sector, what you are worried about, the consumer protection, level playing field, good quality of lending, just focus on that. But never try to introduce a policy that require a very detailed, because the next day will be obsolete. And I think this is very important because many regulators, I was in the government, I do understand the biggest problem with the bureaucracy, we have to work with everything uniform, with the uniformity. If we try to introduce the discretion, there will be a chaotic system. Because for the bureaucracy, there is no way you could do a discretion, because it might create a different interpretation for the regulation. Then the next question is, how could bureaucracy respond to the need of this kind of development? Yeah, because what we need is a very agile bureaucracy. It's an oxymoron actually. How can you have an agile bureaucracy? Yeah, an agile fiscal policy, and there is no way the government could catch up to the innovation because the next day will be obsolete. Unfortunately, Fifi, I don't have the answer for this. But if I may suggest, I recall about a couple months ago, I had a long discussion with a colleague from FSA in Japan. Maybe the future, for example, like on the financial sector, we probably need to move rather than static regulation to dynamic supervision, because that's all the regulators can do. Otherwise, you prevent the innovation to happen, and if that's the case, then the impact could be even worse. Unfortunately, if I cannot come with something that more promising, but I think as a regulators, we have to, to highlight the importance of the changing of the mindset. Thank you.
Thank you. Pak Pungki, Rana mentions about the importance of social protections. How can we mitigate or help the adverse impact for the loser and the vulnerable? Does it require a different kind of social protection system?
Thank you, Bu Vivi. I'd like to pick up from what Rana has made in his presentation about the land capital and labor mobility. Let's talk about labor mobility. Here, I already mentioned that we need to make the workers prepare for the new technological advancements. I agree that we don't need to protect the jobs, but the workers. So that's why actually in my earlier presentation, I said that we are preparing to restructure the curricula. We are now restructuring the curricula of the 11 types of jobs from the high school level to the university level. So in that way, we would like our workers to be able to adapt with the new requirements because of the technological advancements. And we also improve the way we work with the industry by, for example, promoting the vocational training, technical educational trainings, and apprenticeship among them. So that's actually what we have in Indonesia right now. And the third thing, actually, harmonization of the regulation and standardizations. That's from the labor market. At the social protection level for the workers, actually what we do is actually giving them opportunities to go to training and retraining programs, including how ICT is going to be suitable for their new jobs, for example. So this is actually happening in parts of Indonesia. For example, we have now vocational trainings or labor training programs introducing, for example, the ICT curriculum there. or digital network program. So something like this that we have already in Indonesia now. And on the land issues, we know that actually land administration has been a big problem in Indonesia. Since the past 3 years, for example, our president has made sure that the Minister of Land Administration introduced the speed of processing the land titles. Without using technology from this ministry, it is impossible that they have achieved to distribute 2.3 million certificates, land certificate which is already backlogged since the past 20, 30 years ago. So by having land titles, the poor especially actually have been able to possess land legally, and then they can do it for whatever business they would like to do. So land mobilization is one thing for the poor, but also for the government. It will be a bit easier for us to prepare better public services because the certainty of land availability is there because of this policy. So land mobilization is one thing that we also introduced, but also now the last thing about social protection. I mentioned earlier in my explanation that we introduce community facilitators on our social security programs and social assistance programs. In the social security programs, for example, in our national health programs, we introduced the Japanese approach of Sarusha. This is actually community facilitators working at the village level to introduce, okay, this is the national health programs. This is actually the ease of making the applications, paying the annual premium, and claim the insurance benefit. Yeah, through this approach, I think the expansion of the beneficiaries application is higher and higher. The second thing, for example, in our subsidized rice program, in the past, we distribute the rice physically. So each family receives 15 kilograms. But since Indonesia is very strong in social capital, sometimes incorrect targeting makes that actually Rana is my poor neighbor, he doesn't get the rice. Having this in-person interaction between the beneficiaries making me feel sorry for Rana, so I share my rice package 30% to Rana. We introduce now the non-cash benefit system. So beneficiaries will have bank account, and the government will transfer the rice subsidy benefit to this bank account. So as a person who is benefiting the program, I will receive 100% benefit of the social assistance. Meaning, my benefit will be 30%, 40% higher. So in terms of the social assistance to be distributed to the poor, it's going to be reaching towards 100% program. So something like this that we introduce. So I agree again, Rana, thank you for raising the issues of the land, capital, and social protection mobility.
Thank you. And we use technology to gather participation from the audience. We have quite a number of questions from the audience using Slido. We have like several questions. Maybe the first one that I would like to pass to the panels. One of the questions is, technology requires skilled labor. Should Indonesia accept tech improvement? What should Indonesia do to the workers, which majority are unskilled? This is similar to what Dede already raised and also Rana already raised. But anyone would like to elaborate more on the specific things that Indonesia should do?
Okay, if I may, I think again, this is inevitable. We have to upgrade ourselves. Yeah, because for example, a country like Indonesia, there is no way we continue with the cheap labor. If we continue with the cheap labor, there is no way we can compete with Bangladesh. Their wages is only 1/3 compared to us. So somehow we need to go for the technology ladder to upgrade our skill. The question is, how could we do it? I think the current administration is doing the right thing by providing a sort of like a highlight and emphasize on the so-called vocational training. I think this is a very important one. Also improve the quality of education. But besides of that, because if you want to improve the quality of the human capital, sometimes it will take about 25 years, one generation. So the best way to do it is to open up the investment regime By inviting the foreign direct investment to come, you would expect the technology spillover that might come from this process. That's probably one of the solutions in the short term. While at the same time, we continue to sort of like improve the quality of human capital using this vocational training, providing the double deduction if the private sector would like to provide the training, providing the scholarships like what the government is doing with the LPDP, etc. But in the short term, need to be combined with opening up the investment regime as well. And you could expect the technology spillover that people can learn on that process.
Would you like to add on this? Anyone would like to add on this? Yeah, Rana.
So just a point on urbanization. So we've talked about what can be done in the case of education, etc., different sectors. Cities, as the WDR 2013, which was on jobs, ended, it ended on this note that, basically to the effect that we used to think that firms, the private sector is what creates jobs. And while that's true, it's also cities. Cities create jobs because the nature of your city actually kind of determines the kind of firms you have located there. And it also determines how much people are able to interact with one another, have bounce off ideas, get goods moving up and down, services moving up and down. And actually, if you look at the typical, if you looked at a picture of a typical advanced country city, and you try to trace out where people work, where people live, you'd actually see people are living in the north, they're going to work in the south, etc., etc. In our developing country cities, the city actually tends to be much more segmented. And that's partly because of the spatial planning of the city is not good, transport connectivity is not good. So just a basic thing like getting, and I know it's not easy, but just much better economic and spatial planning, coordinated planning, can actually get a lot out of urbanization. And I think this is extremely important because this region is going through urbanization in a big way. And we know that once you build or do not build urban infrastructure, it's actually very difficult to do something about it. A lot of the cities that you see in Europe, they are built around infrastructure that was made 1,000 years ago. So the mega cities of today, trying to change them, it's politically extremely difficult, but there's a huge opportunity right now with Asia's secondary cities. And getting the urbanization of those secondary cities actually can do a lot. And I should just point out that any city, 40 to 60% of employment in a city is non-traded. It's basically people serving each other. If you can get the overall productivity of a city high, you will get better wages for everyone, including the relatively less skilled.
Thank you. Another question that comes from the audience. Structure of the company in Indonesia is still dominated by SMEs and vocational schools scattered. How the government strategy to run massive apprenticeship? Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I think I have to reskill myself if technology doesn't work. So I think we should not underestimate the power of the SME sector. Okay, and it's not. I interpret this not in a negative context, but I actually think it in a positive way. Because what you have in Indonesia is individuals are actually extremely digital. Okay, you have the #1 nation on Twitter, Instagram stories of Jakarta and Bandung are like top of the charts, and I think SMEs are adopting and adapting. If you look at what an SME which would sort of just sell in and around its own catchment area, what things like social commerce have done is phenomenal. They are now actually, SMEs have learned how to catalog their goods. SMEs have learned how to, by the way, open and register themselves. The registration process may be complex, okay, in Indonesia compared to many other countries, but that's for the policymakers. The individuals, given their entrepreneurship, have learned how to put stuff online, they've learned how to transact. With the help of some of the large tech giants, they've learned how to market themselves. There are several stories of a mom and pop shop now actually selling or exporting has now employed 5 more people, 10 more people, all of it enabled by technology. People didn't teach them. Okay? I think the good thing about some of these technologies is the self-learning. Kids learn it faster. Okay? And when you really want to adapt and you are, by the way, that's the same thing if you look at Gojek and if you look at some of these things, the driver has learned how to become more professional. The driver has learned how to sort of, and by the way, who knows, tomorrow these could be the financial services agents. So that is one part. I don't think we should underestimate the power of what SMEs can actually do if enabled in the right way on technology. I think the next one is just in terms of the government role, and I think Pak Khatib made a great point on the regulatory dilemma. How do you drive technology and whose interests, and how do you do a balanced thing? I think on one hand, there are issues between offline, online, there are issues between winner take all. And I just think making sure that you have a balanced approach and not over-regulate, because that will just stifle the innovation, but just enough to make sure that certain principles and whether it is also the interest of the consumer and the worker are kept in mind. I just think it will unleash a wave of productivity and employment, which will be equal, by the way. Interesting statistic, right? In the digital world, in the SMEs, 35% of the SMEs are actually owned and run by women. In the offline world, it's 12%. So you are actually, from a gender standpoint, it's a phenomenal thing. Financial inclusion, a lot of government's efforts, Laku Pandai and all are great, but e-commerce, where Tokopedias, Bukalapaks, Elvenias are forcing or requiring, it force is the wrong word, are requiring tax registrations and so on. The SME is willing to register, willing to open a bank account. So it's when policy and entrepreneurship go hand in hand, it can actually solve, at least at the SME end, the problem of skilling, because they're getting self-skilled.
There is another question which is related to what you mentioned earlier. What kind of tax policy to boost digital innovation? How to balance short-term government target in income versus innovation learning curve that needs subsidy? Anyone would like to tackle that question? Should I repeat it again? What kind of tax policy to boost digital innovation? How to balance the short-term government target in income versus innovation learning curve that needs subsidy?
I think that should be the question that Pak Sua has to answer. The tax policy, right? Well, I think the idea of the tax policy right now is that we are always shorted in the tax revenue system. But what I would like to propose is that maybe we need to really understand how our tax system works if we want to introduce the technology in our economic activities every day. So somehow, actually what we see in the very short term is that, okay, if we provide tax incentive for this, and then maybe lose some money. But then again, sometimes we forget actually, if we let have some tax incentive for short term, we may create boost in the economic activities at whatever level. Then we should see how actually this economic boost be taxed and then get how many more additional tax revenues for this. Somehow actually we are not that patient to do this kind of research. And this is actually what we need to do, I think, in the future, Bu Fifi. So we really understand how tax policies will work, how it will help boost the digital economy and things like that. So I think this is what I think we should do.
I was trying to avoid this question. So let me talk as a former Minister of Finance then. I'm not a great fan of this tax incentive, to be honest, because I think I mentioned to you earlier, I think the biggest obstacles for many startups in many countries all over the world, including Indonesia, is the regulatory environment rather than the tax issue. Yeah, you know, for them, they could cut the transaction cost so easily by doing this innovation. Tax policy is perhaps a sort of like a supplement to the main issue, a very conducive regulatory environment. That's the first one. The second one, if you want to introduce the so-called, the quote-unquote industrial policy using the tax policy, If I may suggest, let's focus on the input rather than to protect the sector. There is a justification, for example, if you want to provide a government assistance on R&D, yeah, on the human capital, then that's why I said that you could give a tax deductible if you provide training. But I'm rather reluctant to provide a tax incentive like tax holiday if you go into the tax business, yeah, because like it or not, it might create a distortion. And in my case, I think if you look at we learned from the experience of the tax amnesty. We did the tax amnesty. Look at the repatriation; it's pretty small because the main reason to attract the foreign investment to come was not a tax rate, is a conducive regulatory environment. That is why it is very important for the regulators not to repeat the old way of thinking. And this is the thing that what the startup needs. That's maybe my 2 cents as a former Minister of Finance.
Bu Vivi.
Rana, would you like to?
Yeah, but I think there's also another problem, Pak Khatib. We introduced 1% tax rate to the SMEs since the past few years. And actually, there are lots of complaints, but actually this 1% tax rate expensive for them. Even actually in my project, 14,000 of coffee farmers are now in a very difficult position in how to pay the 1% tax, because actually it is a lot for them. And last week I heard from the news, the Minister of Finance would like to reconsider the rate of the tax. So that's why actually this is how I say actually we really need to understand how this tax system is working in promoting the economy, especially in the SMEs businessmen. Thank you.
How many percent of SMEs pay taxes from? Oops.
Okay, it's pretty small. I think the main issue about tax is about data. The reason why we cannot collect it's very difficult to collect the tax revenue. The issue is about data. The good thing about the tax amnesty that we did is we enriched the data, so we know the profile of the people. So it's much. So I don't think the tax rate it's really the key issue. If you want to collect the tax, the tax of the people in. Maybe some of you are not very familiar with this. In Tanah Abang, yeah, the problem is we don't have the data. The reason why we introduced the 1% is because we cannot check their bookkeeping or journal. That is why we put the final tax on that, yeah, to make it simple. Yeah, so the issue is more about data. Some people can complain about 0.5%, but 1%, but to me, maybe again, this perspective from the MOF, I'm not really sure that necessary condition is a tax rate. Yeah, because look at, with the tax amnesty 2%, how much the repatriation that Indonesia get? You're talking about $10 billion US. You were talking about 400 billion US dollar. It wasn't in total, and only $10 billion US returned to Indonesia. When he introduced the tax rate was 2%. So maybe the issue is, in my view, Pak Pungki, maybe more on the conducive environment, the infrastructure that like what you are doing now, rather than tax rate. Not try to be this defensive as finance minister.
Just very quickly on this, I wonder, I know in the Indian context one always has this debate about the subsidies that are given to SMEs, but one proposal that's been made is to shift from, for example, the subsidy from defining firms in terms of size, for example, move it in terms of just age, and that gives you a natural sunset clause. So you basically tell firms that, look, you started off, you've got a subsidy exemption from paying this kind of tax for 3 years. And that has some nice benefits. It doesn't give this incentive to stay small, and it's got a natural sunset clause. If it's ineffective, wears out.
It's almost 12 o'clock. I would like to ask each panelist to give one sentence answer to the most important things that the country Indonesia or other G20 needs to do to make sure that these technology disruptions will actually benefiting the poor and addressing inequality? One sentence for each. Maybe start with.
It's difficult, I think, because we are entering the new situation that we don't really understand. Yeah, and we need to learn from the youngster. Let me conclude by sharing my experience. I was in Silicon Valley about 2 years ago. When I asked them what is the average working age here, and the young lady, she gave an answer which struck me. She said, it is getting older, sir. It is late 20s. So I'm a dinosaur. So in this room, if we don't have the youngsters, we probably cannot learn what's going to happen in the future.
I would go with basic infrastructure, and of course now broadband infrastructure. Just do not neglect that. And the second thing is building cognitive skills. I think we might be having these debates over and over again, and 10 years would have gone by and we have not improved our roads and power supply systems, irrigation, etc. And we may not have done enough to build cognitive skills in primary, junior, secondary schools.
Tosan.
Doesn't like me at all, so I'll hold it. So the first one would be, I think, prepare for the skills of tomorrow, not the skills of yesterday. Okay, and a lot of emphasis, for example, on things like English. If you look at technology, it's obviating the need for that. Technologies like Babelfish will enable with a chip here or with a Bluetooth, you can communicate. So just be thoughtful of the skills that you are focusing on and anticipate all kinds of change, because we just don't know what we don't know.
My job covers the area of social protection, poverty reduction, labor and SMEs. And we have done a lot in introducing how technology will be adapted by the people. But what I don't see now we have is actually development facilitators working with the people, especially the poor. We have so many nationwide anti-poverty programs. We have more than 100,000 community facilitators. This is actually the intervention that we need to have. We have to equip the facilitators with technological advancements relevant to their jobs, and we have to let them use this new knowledge on technology to work with the people so that our poor people, the unskilled workers, are able to understand how their business is moving towards a better situation with the technological advancements that we cannot stop. Thank you.
We start the session with questions whether it is a blessing or a curse. I'm really glad that the four speakers give us optimistic looks of the future. Tosan mentions that human has remarkable capability to adapt. And all of them emphasize the importance of skill. There are a lot of homework that needs to be done in terms of improving skill, social protections, improving firm productivity. But also Dede mentions about that there is a need of different kind of regulation that focus more on principle instead of rules, very agile bureaucracy. So we hope with these sessions we will have a more optimistic futures regarding yes we can. We will be able to ensure this technology change disruptions will actually benefiting for all, including the poor. Thank you very much. Please give round of applause to the distinguished speakers.
Thank you. Thank you to moderators and speaker for the very fruitful session. You may go back to seat. Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it concludes our first session for today. And now we will have a lunch break. The committee has provided lunch at Kayu Manis Restaurant. It's on the hotel building. It's on lobby hotel. There will be signage outside that will direct you to the restaurant. Once again, it's at Kayu Manis Restaurant in lobby hotel building. And for those who perform sholat, the musola is upstairs one level up from this ballroom. Okay, and then please kindly resume back at 1 p.m. So we would have 1 hour of lunch break. So please kindly resume back at 1 p.m. Thank you.